after it was World, and when it became Dynamic, I did a couple of tracks in there. One of the tracks was called The Break, and the other one was 10 Times Sweeter Than You. Again, I didn't hear 10 Times Sweeter Than You when I heard it being played, in the studio, but I didn't hear it otherwise. And then when I came to England, one day, this guy said to me, "You've got a wicked track out, man, called 10 Times Sweeter Than You." I says, "I recorded that years ago." He said, "Well, yeah, it's out." So I went and around to Jetstar, Promise, and I got me a copy, and that's how I heard it. Most of my shows, people always request 10 Times Sweeter Than You, because it's a fantastic track, you know. And I re-recorded it a few years ago with Prince Fatty, and that's also a fantastic version. I wrote a song called "Extra Careful," and I recorded it, but it wasn't reggae. It was more R&B. But that song became a huge hit in Jamaica, massive hit in Jamaica. They still play it even today. And the few times that I've been to Jamaica and I've done the festivals, as soon as I step on stage, people start shouting. They want to hear Extra Careful. I usually write melody and lyrics together. But when I wrote it, I couldn't get a reggae feel on it. It had an R&B feel on it. So I recorded it as R&B. And when it went to Jamaica, the first person that started singing it live on stage was Beres Hammond. And every time Beres had a show, he would sing two of my songs. One was a ballad called Woman, and then Extra Careful. But I was gutted that he didn't record it. But most of his shows, live shows, he sang Extra Careful and Woman. He put them together, combined them together, and did that, which was beautiful, because the best compliment you can ever get, is when you hear somebody singing your song. Like I remember the first time I heard UB40 cover one of my songs, and there's a big venue in London, in Brixton, and they were having a show there, UB40, and they invited me to come to the show, and my wife and I went, and I swear to you, Zeb, that I was standing about 4 or 5 rows from the stage, and when the guy said, and now to sing one of our favorite songs that we have recorded, this one, by a guy who might be who's standing in the crowd right there beside you, Winston Francis. From the minute he said Winston Francis, I went deaf. I couldn't hear nothing. I just went completely deaf. When they started playing the song, all I could hear is I couldn't hear a thing. My wife said to me, "Wow, that was beautiful. What do you think?" I said, "I don't know." This is strange. One day I was listening to an internet radio, and they were interviewing a woman was interviewing a guy, and during the interview, she said to him, how did you start your singing career? And he said, "Well, it's very strange, but when I decided to start singing professionally, I decided I was going to enter a competition, and they had a competition at the Carrick Theatre called A Star Is Born." And I thought, wow, this guy, that's my time he's talking about. So I was all ears, and he said, I was sitting in the audience. He said, and a group came on called the Sheridans. And he said, after they sang, man, I just got up and went back home. So he said, I decided I was going to start it. I still wanted to be in music. So I decided I was going to do something else. And I decided to learn the keyboard. And that was Ansel Collins. Give him a call. Give him a call and ask him about that. First class musician, you know, and not just a great musician, a great guy. Really, really nice person.
Yeah, I would like to talk about the different name variations.
The thing was, I just did not sing one particular style. One of the greatest bass players in the world is a guy called Philip Chen. He played with Rod Stewart. He played with everybody. I remember when I recorded the track, I didn't really like the bass line, and I said I need Philip to play this bass line. So I went to his home and spoke, because he was a very good, very close friend of mine. So I went to him and I say, "Hey Phil, I want you to play the bass on this track for me." And he came up to the studio and he played it, and he got mad at me, man, because when he was finished playing, I said to him, "How much you going to charge me for that?" He told me to, in so many words, man, Jamaican swear words. He said, "You're my friend, man, and you asked me to come and play the track. You asked me how much, and I said, look, man, oh, sorry, bro." But when the track was finished and he listened to it and he said, "This sounds like Nat King Cole, man." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah." He said, and everybody in the studio said, "Yeah, it's got a classy sound, of, it don't sound like you." So we decided, when we put it out, we're going to change the name. So I came up with the name Billy Cole. So, and then I was working at EMI, and I wrote this song called Woman. And when I did it, the managing director of EMI Publishing, she said, we need a good name. So she called me Wayne Vandross. One day, Roy Cousins came to my house, because Roy was a very, very good friend of mine. I knew him from home. We shared the same back fence. The back of my home, the back fence was his back fence. Lots of times when I was away, if my mom wanted someone to run some errands for her, she would ask Roy, because he was a good kid. He said, "I think one of the biggest mistakes you ever made, man, was when you start changing your name." He said, "You should go back to your original name. And if you go back," he said, "because more people know you as Winston Francis than they know you as Billy Cole or anything else. So you should go back." And when he suggested that we did some recordings and do an album, he said, "I don't want these fancy names. I want to go back to your old name, Winston Francis or Cobra Man." So he put on the album Winston Francis, Cobra Man.
There was one project that you did in the 90s that I thought was very strange. It was called King Cool.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, you see, the guy in the cartoon, the guy who did the drawings, right? He copied Dennis Bovell, because Dennis had dreadlocks, and he drew an image like, but we didn't really know about it. It's so strange, man, that one day I was home and I was broke. Broke. When I say broke, zilch. And I was sitting home thinking, who can I, approach my brother, to borrow some funds from him, because I need some money badly, man. And I got a phone call, and it was Dennis Bovell. And he said, "What's up?" I say, "Ain't nothing, man." He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "At the moment, nothing." He said, you want to earn some money?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Okay, come over by the studio." I said, "When?" He said, "Now." I said, "Okay." So I jumped on the train, right? And I couldn't afford the train fares up. Yeah, I couldn't afford the train fare. So I jumped on the train, right, hoping that none of the guards came up and asked me for my ticket. And when I got to Brixton, I just ran past the guard. So I got there, And I went up to the studio, and when I saw Dennis, and he said, I got some two songs. He said the first one is Benny King Stand By Me. And I said, oh, I know that. He says, I know you know that. He says, well, I want you to do it. Just before I went into the studio, he said to me, the guy is paying £300 per track. Now imagine, Zeb, I didn't have money to pay the train fare, right? Which was about 40 pence, right? Which is it's 100 pence to a pound. Okay. And I couldn't afford the first pound. And he's telling me that the guy is paying £300 per track. I'm a millionaire, man. I'm rich. So I said, what? I said, yeah, great, man. So I went in and I recorded the track. And when I was finished recording it, I came out and he says, oh, he said, I got something to tell you. I said, what's that? He said, I just found out that the guy is recording the tracks for the record company's BMG. I said, yeah? He said, yeah. So he said, what I think you should do is they're offering you cash, £600 cash, or a contract. He said, I think you should take the contract. Don't take the money. Now imagine, Zeb, you can't even pay your train fare, and you're just been told that you're getting £600, right? And now this guy's telling you don't take that money. That's crazy, man. But you know what? I said to myself, if he called me to do this job, and he's the man who was in charge, he should know what he's doing. So if it means going back home broke, take the contract. So I said, okay, I'll take the contract. So he said, the next track is Chain Gang. So I said, whoa, wicked. So I jumped around the mic. And while it was just before I started singing, I said, boy, I'm as rich as John Major today. And John Major at that time was the prime minister. And he heard when I said that, on the mic. So he said, what did you say? Just say. I said, nothing. So he came into the studio and he said, what did you just say, Winston? I said, I'll be getting. He said, don't tell me you take the money. I said, no, man. I said, I'm taking the contract. And he said, oh. So he went back and we recorded the track. When I was finished recording the track and he played it down, the guy who was the contractor, the guy came to me and he says, Winston, he was a French guy. He said, Winston, that is a marvelous job. He said, I thank you so much, man. He says, anyway, we got some paperwork to do. So I said, he says, you're taking the contract, right? I said, yes, sir. I'm taking the contract. So he says, have a read through, take a few minutes, have a read through. And if everything is okay, you can sign the dotted line and I'll sign the contract also. I said, okay. So I read through it. Didn't read all because it was like 8 or 10 pages. So I just scanned it through and I said, okay, that's it. So now I'm going to sign it, but I have to ask Dennis if he can give me a train fare to go back home. And when I was finished, I called the guy and I signed it. And he said, thank you very much. And he signed it. And he says, well, let me give you a drink. Now, a drink in England means, here's some money. You can, buy yourself something, So he said, let me buy you a drink. So I said, oh, thanks very much. And he gave me, some money. And I went back into the studio. When I counted it, it was £600, man. I couldn't believe it. So I said, what? So I thought, man, this is strange. So I went inside. I took off £200, put 400 in my pocket, took £200, and I went in and I said, hey, Dennis, I said, here's a drink for you, man. And he says, a drink for me? I said, yeah, here's £200. And he said, for what? He said, where you get money? He said, you took the money instead of the contract. I said, no. I said, here's the contract, man. And Dennis laughed and says, no, Winston, it's okay. I'm getting paid, man, and I'm getting good money. So he said, I'm glad you got the contract. I said, yeah, I've taken the contract. And would you believe it, Zeb? About must have been about a year and a half later, about 18 months later, I was doing a show in New York. And my wife called me and said, some woman, a French woman, keeps calling, asking for you. Her name is Rosine. I said, yeah. I said, what for? She said, she just said something about some record, that you done. And I said, okay. And when I came home, the day that I came home, I got a phone call from this woman called Rosine. And she said, Winston. I said, what can I do for you? She said, I'm calling about your hit song in France. I said, hit song? Which hit song? She said, Stand By Me. And I could hear it playing in the background. She said, you can hear it in the background playing on the radio 3 or 4 times a day. And I said, wow. And she said, well, in the first 2 weeks, we sold over 90,000 copies. If I didn't take that contract, man, and just said, yes, I want to settle for the money, I wouldn't have got the contract. And I would be 20,000 or more, because ever since then, I keep getting royalties on the track. So it's never stopped.
How did you link up with Prince Fatty?
Little Roy was doing some work with Mike. His name is Mike Pelliconi. He wanted some backing vocals. So Prince Fatty said to Little Roy, for this particular project we're doing, I want the best backing vocals we can find. So who do you think we can get? And he said, how about Winston Francis? And he said, well, Winston Francis is not going to do backing vocals. He said, yeah, he would do it for me. He would do it for me. And he said, you sure? And he said, yeah. So he said, give him a call then. And Roy called me and he said, I'm doing, some tracks and I need some backing vocal, Winston. Would you do it for me? And I said, sure, no problem. And he said, but it's all the way down in Brighton. I said, don't matter where it is, man. So I drove, and the day that I went down and did the session, Mike said to me, man, I always loved your vocals, man. And I would really like, if you could do a track for me. So we had a chat, because I just didn't like recording for, each and everybody. So we had a good chat. He showed me, what he was doing. And I thought it was, really good. So I said, okay. And I started doing some tracks for him. And he's very astute in his recordings, who he gets, rhythm players. I was in Italy, in Cesena, in Italy, and a good friend of mine he's a studio owner, producer, and he asked me to. He told me he was doing this rhythm track. I had this friend, who very successful guy, and then he went on the drug trail. He started, snorting a lot of coke. He was living on the street and eating out of the garbage cans. Thing was Germany. When I got a phone call from a friend, and he said, Arthur, it's bad, man. Arthur is really bad, man. I said, yeah. He says, we're trying to put a program together. And he said, I was talking to a very good friend of ours called Ted Gordon. And he said, Ted said, if we could get a group of guys, we could each give £50 a week. We could get them a place to live. Could have been, 18 months, 2 years. I was in Italy and I got this call. And when I got the call, it was Arthur. And he said, hey, Win, what's up, man? And I said, Arthur, I said, hey, nice to hear you, man. What's up? But he said, you can stop now because I killed the devil last night. I said, what do you mean? He said, I killed the devil, man. I'm out of that. I'm done with the powder. And I was so overwhelmed, man, that tears came to my eyes. And I said, I said, I'm so happy, man, but I ain't gonna stop until you're on the road. And he says, you can stop, man. He said, because I'm telling everybody else. I got me a job and I'm working and everything is good. So that night I sat down and wrote, I killed the devil last night. I killed him with a wooden knife. I killed the devil last night because he wanted to take my life. And when Afghan, played the rhythm, I fitted it on the rhythm so well. So that song was dedicated to my friend Arthur. But sad to say, like about 3 years later, he went back to the same thing and he OD'd. So, but the song is still there. And I remember one day I was down in Brighton at Prince Fatty's studio, and he said to me, Winston, the song I'd love you to do. I said, what's that? He says, I killed the devil last night. And I said, no, man, but that's doing really well in Europe. He said, we could do a better version, man. And I said, okay, let me hear it. And the guys struck it up, man, and it sounded fantastic. It sounded great. So I recorded it again. But since then, about 6 other people have recorded it, in Europe. There's a Greek group that did a really good version of it. So there's about 6 different bands that have recorded it in Europe.